Welcome to the TSD Mindfulness video for teaching number 12. But before I go into teaching number 12, I'm going to do a review of teachings number 9, 10, and 11. And I do want to let you know that if you have been going through all of the teachings, the teaching videos, and you are now at teaching number 12, you are now at an intermediate level of TSD mindfulness. So the teachings 1 through 11, I would consider more of a beginner, introductory level. And now in this video, we're going to get into some more intermediate level information about the TSD mindfulness teachings. So that's exciting. But yeah, so let's go over a review starting with teaching number 9. We talked about the desires of the fields of the temperamental body, and teaching number 9 is the mental field desires change. Specifically, the mental field desires the ability to make a decision because decisions usually lead to change. The mental field is interested in change and making decisions because the mental field analyzes options, reflects on the past, makes projections about the future, right? These are all processes that help us make decisions. And the mental field can also be creative. But despite all these benefits, right, because there are benefits from having these abilities to make these decisions, when we practice TSD mindfulness, we quiet this powerhouse temporarily. And the reason is this powerhouse of reflection, simulation, projection, it distracts us from our gut fields, our guts, what's going on there, and it distracts us from our hearts. So when I often start beginning working with people, clients and students, they are so much in the head, right? Their attention is so much going with what they're thinking about that they are distracted from what's even going on a nervous system level, and they don't even know that their nervous system is activated, engaged when it is. So that's one of the benefits of quieting your mental field, taming your mental field, so you can start tuning in more into your gut field. And also, the mental field often misses the point being that much of the time it's not as important what we are doing, but how we are doing it. The heart field is more interested in how we're doing what we're doing. The mental field is more interested in what we're doing. So that is the review for teaching number 9. Teaching number 10, the gut field desires preservation. This is quite opposite to the mental field, right? The mental field wants things to change, wants to tweak everything that's going on. But the gut field wants to preserve, keep everything the same, keep status quo the same, and especially keep us alive, right? Keep preservation of our own life. Our gut field is also invested in our emotional survival and concerned with our preserving our ego. So emotional survival is keeping us from experiencing an emotion that's going to be uncomfortable. Egotistical survival is concerned about how people are perceiving us or how we are perceiving ourselves. But emotional and egotistical survival are actually not always in our best interest. In fact, in some situations, emotionally breaking down or having ego deflating your ego is really important to moving into these perfect relationships that we're talking about. So that's a review for teaching number 10 and the review for teaching number 11, the heart field desires consideration. We cannot become fully attentive in our hearts until we've moved our consciousness into our hearts. And we cannot move our consciousness into our hearts if our consciousness is really wrapped up in our thinking, or it's really affected by our nervous system being triggered. So it is really important for us to tame our mental field, soothe our gut field, so we can move our attention into our hearts. We also need to use devout and steady attention to dwell within our hearts. So when our consciousness is moved into our hearts, we're using this devout and steady attention. Your attention and surrender in the heart instigates the healing process and the joyful experience. So these are two things that your soul wants for you. So that completes the review of teachings number 9, 10, and 11. And now I'm going to begin with TSD Mindfulness teaching number 12. So we went over the first list of the 3 lists of 3, the second list of the 3 lists of 3, and now we're going to go over the third list of 3. And this list is titled The Products of the Temperamental Body. And just as a review, the temperamental body is made up of our mental field, our gut field, and our heart field, and it determines our inclinations and our emotional responses. Basically, it's our stress system. And so far, you might reflect and notice how your temperamental body has affected your approach to stress, how you react in stressful situations. The key to becoming ultra mindful of how you develop your inclinations and your emotional responses is understanding how these 3 fields of the temperamental body operate and what they produce. So that's what I'm going to go over in this video of teaching number 12, is what the mental field operates on and produces, right? So we talked about the desires already. Now what do the fields actually produce? So the mental field operates on logic. It is very conditional and it produces decisions. So logic is unique to every individual, which is not usually how people think about it. People think that we all have the same logic, that this person is operating on this set of logic and we're operating on that same set of logic, but that's not how it is. We actually, due to our different scenarios, situations, as we're growing up, we actually create these different logics. So no 2 people have the same exact set of logic. And that can be hard during conflict because one person is operating on one set of beliefs and the other person is operating this other set of beliefs, and they conflict, and it can be very hard. So the mental field operates on logic and reasoning. The mental field's chief responsibility is to gather information and send it through this logical process. So this logical process isn't always correct, though. And so let me break down what that logical process is. So if P, then Q, that what logic is, right? Logic is if this, then that. If this idea is true, then this needs to happen. If this idea is false, then this other thing must be true. So all these conditions. And sometimes we have to dig a little deeper to become conscious of what our own conditional thinking is. Often our thoughts aren't designed that way. They don't come out that way in this conditional setup. We need to kind of sit with it and be curious and ask, what is the conditional thinking that's driving this thought? But here's an example. For example, someone's logic might look like this. If a person is wearing a military uniform, then that person is trustworthy, right? This type of logic. And this is implicit bias is based in this. Implicit bias on gender, weight, racism. So it's this automatic thinking that we have based on this conditional thinking. And I have an episode on my podcast. My podcast is called The Aware Mind. I have an episode on implicit bias and racism and mindfulness that was published on March 7th, 2022. So you can check that out. To better understand how we build our logic over a lifetime, I'd like to explain the information processing model, which comes from educational psychology. So stimuli come into our sensory memory, and some stimuli is forgotten, and some other stimuli we process through our working memory. And so what I mean by stimuli is something we hear, a facial expression, something that we see happen. This is a sensory information, something we feel in our body. So the sensory information we process in our working memory, we contemplate it, we ask questions about it. And there some of the information is lost, but if we process it enough, or it's intense enough, we move it into our long-term memory. So that's one way that we develop this logic. It goes through this process. A sensory experience comes into our brains, we process it, and then some of it goes into our long-term memory and is stored there as this conditional thinking for the most part. So this is a simplified version of how logic is built. A more comprehensive example would include emotions, having emotional experience with the events. But after relying on logic, the mental field produces a decision, and decisions about what you spend money on, who you call for guidance on what you're going to have for dinner, and so on, all these different decisions. And for many of us, our lives are made up of this long string of decisions, one after another. And some of the decisions are made consciously and others are made more unconsciously. And additionally, some of our decisions are long-standing. And I like to call those habits, these habitual patterns that we have, originally started out as a decision, but it's this decision that we've really placed on a long-term level. So if you're struggling to make a decision, or if you're someone that generally struggles in that way, it's possible that your three fields, your mental field, your gut field, and your heart fields are at odds. They're kind of pulling you into different directions. So that's why this work with the TSD mindfulness can be really helpful, because you can start to understand my mental field is really pushing for this type of decision. My gut field is pulling me in this other direction. My heart is pulling me in this other direction. And once you can sit with that and understand it, it'll be easier to make decisions. If you would like to become more mindful of your own decision process, here's a few questions that you can ask yourself. And these are in the book, Tame, Soothe, Dwell, if you have that book. What situations are you making decisions about? You can ask yourself that. What type of beliefs about the world, or what type of beliefs about yourself are driving those decisions? Do you avoid or do you thrive on decision making? What are some of the most influential decisions you've ever made? And then you can think about some of the biggest transformations or decisions, changes that have happened in your life. And you can reflect back on that and think, was that really because of a decision I made, or did that just kind of unfold naturally? Yeah, so just overall, to better understand your decision process and how your mental field is involved, really sitting and being mindful of your thought process. What thoughts are you thinking are coming up during that decision process? And also reflect on, how much your mental field is involved in your decision making, how much your gut field is involved in your decision making, and how much your heart field is involved. And in the next video, we'll talk more about the gut and how the gut is involved in decisions, and what gut decisions are and are not. This concludes the TSD mindfulness video for teaching number 12.